G'day guys, Jace here. Okay, going to do a video all about these. These are EDFs. Well, actually, this is a ducted fan, and the reason it's called an EDF is because it is rotated by an electric motor. So in the RC hobby world, it's what's known as an EDF, an electric ducted fan. Now, there's quite a lot of videos out there that claim to give a lot of information about EDFs, and in actual fact there's hardly any information. I sat and watched one last night. It was entitled "Let's Talk About EDFs," and I was quite optimistic. I thought, good, this person's going to talk about EDFs properly, but in actual fact all he did was show all the EDF models that he has, all the different sizes. He discussed what he was going to do with them in terms of what aircraft he was going to put them in, and he gave a brief description on their thrust outputs. Now, I'm not going to do that. I mean, if you're watching this, then you're totally aware of what an inductive fan is trying to do. It's producing thrust to propel your aircraft through the air. But it's a bit more complicated than that. I'm not going to go into science of it because that's way too complicated, but it is more complicated than it just being the size and the thrust. Now, all the fans I'm going to show you today are 70mm fans, but that doesn't make any difference. The whole principle of ducted fans is the same, whether it's a tiny one in a micro habu or if it's 125mm in a giant size replica. Now, the only difference between fans is their quality, how good they are, why some are better than others, and that's what I'm going to go into. And that's what will help you as well choose a decent fan. Now, this one here, this very basic fan, this is a cheap one. Okay, you can see that the blades are thinner at the end than they are at the root. That's not always a good thing. They've got a decent pitch on them. You can see they are grabbing quite a bit of air, but they're also very, very flimsy. They're very, very flexible. And if you have a look at the actual can in which they come in, it's very, very narrow. If I just give you a quick comparison, I won't go into this model too much, but a quick comparison, this is a Delta V unit from E-flite that comes in a standard habu, and you can see it's twice the thickness of this one here. Now, this one that I'm showing you here, this one came in a very cheap model. It was a Star Max model, an F5, and it was a terrible unit. It never really produced anywhere near enough thrust to make the aircraft decent in the air. And I'll go into the reasons for that afterwards. But firstly, let's talk about how a ducted fan actually works, why it produces thrust. This is, in essence, a propeller. I mean, it's got blades, it rotates, they're cut to a pitch. It's a propeller. But it's a very small propeller. And just spinning it like this, although it would produce an airflow, it would produce very little thrust. And the reason for that is because the air would slip very quickly off the end of these props. So what we do is we place them into a duct like that. And then as the blade spins very, very fast, the air can't escape from the end of the blades, and it's forced into this can unit where it's compressed, and then these vanes in here, they've got a slight twist to them. What they do is they straighten the swirling air and ensure that it exits out the back nice and smoothly to give you thrust. But as you can see, if you put this blade into here, by the time the blade is in there, there's very little space at the back for any air to be stored, for any kind of decent air movement. So you can imagine that this fan, when it was spinning with an electric motor, wasn't really producing a great deal of thrust. And because it's flimsy, because the blades are quite flexible, and because there's, if I hold that like that, you can see there's quite a large gap there between the end of the blade and the can, where the can, the inside of the can unit is. Air would escape definitely from that, and you know, it's just a very, very bad EDF. It's very badly designed. The flimsy blades would fall off, they'd break off, they'd flatten out when it spins too fast, and it's just a very, very standard, bad, cheap unit. And when I say cheap, I mean cheap made, because when my first one of this, it actually exploded because I tried to get a bit more performance out of it by adding a higher kV motor, and that actually didn't work in my favour. I didn't really know what I was doing back then, and the fan just exploded. And this actually cost me the best part of $100 with a motor in here for a replacement. So that's not cheap, but it's a bad unit. And this one, in this form, with the motor that it was supplied with, which was a 2600 kV motor, it only produced about 600 grams of thrust in a model that weighed 1.2 kilograms. It was only half the amount of thrust required. So this is a bad unit. It also had no cone on the front here. As you can see with this one, it has a cone on the front. E-Flight have put a cone there, and that cone assists in the air being sucked into these blades nice and smoothly. The smoother you can get air in here, the less turbulence you're going to have throughout the whole can, and the smoother exit you're going to get from the back here. This one just had a nut on the end of the prop shaft, and it like I said, it just produced very, very little thrust. So this is a bad EDF. This is a bad one. Going up then in advancement is this one. The one I showed you before. This is the Delta V 15 from E-Flight, and it's powered by a BL15 E-Flight motor, 3200 kV. Now, a kV is very, very important. Basically, if you've got a small plane, you're going to have a small EDF. If you've got a big plane, you're going to have a big EDF. So what you need to do is match your motor to your battery size to your fan size. That is very important. Now, this being a 70mm fan, this needs to spin at about 50,000 RPM. That's where your optimal thrust is going to be maintained. And so if you apply a 4S battery to this 3200 kV, you get about 48,500 RPM. And that's where E-Flight have deemed this is perfect. Now, they do make another motor exactly the same as this, but 3600 kV, and if you're going to run it in this standard fan unit, it's absolutely fine. If you're running it in a Habu, you don't need to change the ESC, battery or anything, and it will give you slightly better performance. But this one has been matched, and this is a very, very well-made system, well-made EDF. I've got these in a few of my planes, and I've got the 3200 motors connected to 10-bladed fans, 12-bladed fans, this standard 5-bladed fan. I've got them 3200 and 3600 set up, and they're bulletproof. They've had thousands and thousands of flights, and they're just bulletproof. Very well made. Firstly, you can see it's a lot longer, which means you're getting a lot more air stored in there. It also means that these straightening vanes here, they're a lot longer as well, giving the air a lot more time to come out straighter and smoother from the back. The fan is also divergent as well. If you get a vernier and measure across the front and measure across the back, there's 1.5mm difference, and that's because the air is then being squeezed as it goes through, as well as being thrust backwards. Now this, in its standard form with the 3200 kV, this is producing about 1.2 kilograms of thrust, and that's because it's just well designed. It's a nice thick can, it's very, very strong. The blades, as you can see, go almost all the way to the inside of the can. The blades are also wider at the top than they are at the bottom. Now that is a much better configuration. The only reason the other one isn't designed like that is because it's not strong enough to be designed like that. But this one is. This is a bulletproof EDF. I run a lot of these in my machines. Now, when you spin these at 50,000 RPM and they're sucking air in, what you'll find is they'll get turbulence across the front here and across the edge right here. If you put this into something like a Habu, the Habu airframe fits so snugly around it that you don't need any kind of lead-in. And when I say lead-in, I mean one of these. This is a lead-in, and this sits on the front like that, and it makes the air very, very smooth coming into the edge of the fan, and coming into the root of the fan. This cone helps to make it very, very smooth as well. Now, the smoother you can get that air in, the more thrust you're going to get, because the less turbulence you get across the edge of these blades, and they can do their work of sucking and squeezing air. But with the Habu, you don't need this, because it fits snugly in any aircraft where the airframe fits very, very snugly around there. You don't need those leadings, because if it does fit snugly, you have to start cutting away material, and you don't want to cut away material. That's bad. The manufacturers have designed the airframe how they want it and how they need it. So this is a good unit. Now, this one costs you about $110 if you just buy it from the shop. The motor is 70 and the can is about 40, and that's 110. And as I was saying before, this bad one here that came from StarMax, this was actually nearly $100 as it was to buy this with a motor in it. And this produced 600 grams of thrust. This one is producing 1.2 kilograms of thrust. And that's just because it is just a better made, more thought of ducted fan. That's really all I can tell you about this one for now. And now we're going to get on to something which is a bit different. This is a bit of a novelty now that's been coming onto the market lately, and I do run a multitude of these fans in other planes. This is basically a 10-bladed. Is it 10-bladed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, this is a 14-blade. 14-blade. No, it's actually a 12-bladed fan. That's weird, because I actually ordered a 10-blade off the internet, so that's handy to know. And this one, this is a 14-blade ducted fan. Now, the novelty of these is the way they sound. Why people are really starting to put these into their EDFs now is because they sound just like a turbine. Because there's no big gaps between them, like with this one, no big gaps between the blades, like you get there. There's no interval, so you don't get the high-pitched whine. What you get is more like a whooshing of air sound, like a vacuum cleaner, and it actually sounds like a turbine. And I run these in a few planes. I run them in my Habus, and they do sound just like jets. It's very impressive, considering it's just an electric ducted fan. But what you want to know is the science behind them. Now, this one is very, very well designed. Firstly, they give you a nice big cone. See that? That is a beautiful big cone. That is going to make airflow so smooth on the entrance to the fan. Coupled with, yes, they do give you a lead-in, but if I was to put this into an airframe, that would fit snugly around it. And so I said before, it doesn't really matter. But combined with this nice large cone, you get a very, very smooth airflow. Also, if you can see there's these cutouts. You see these cutouts in the side where the motor sits? That's obviously in there, and it's designed to allow the fan to cool. And because there's more of them, because you've got so many straightening vanes, you see how many straightening vanes you got in there? I think there's 8 straightening vanes in there. Because you've got so many straightening vanes, you've got so many of these cutouts. Now, the surface area of those cutouts is probably the same as the cutouts in this one here, where they're just sort of quite large. I don't know if you can can see that, the light's not that great, but they've actually got quite large cutouts in them. But because you've got more, you get more airflow, and it's a lot more efficient at cooling down your motor. Now, as for the performance difference, besides the noise, they do give a lot better performance because they're a lot more efficient, and because there's very small gap between the end of the prop and the actual can itself. Their use of the air that they're sucking in is second to none. Not that I've found anyway right now. They really do produce very good cooling and performance, very good thrust, and like I say, the noise is a novelty as well. So you know, like I say, these are becoming very popular on the market, and I am a big fan of them, which is why I bought these, a 12 blade and a 14 blade. But they put a bit more thought than that into it as well. If you see, I'll just take the fan out. As you see, they've actually made the rear divergent. A divergent means it's actually squeezing the air a lot more than it would do if it was the same diameter at both ends of the can. If this end here was the same as that end there, I mean, I have said with the E-Flight one it's about 1.5mm difference, but this one, the can is actually straight, but what they've done is they've added this divergent ducting system here at the back, and that will really increase the thrust, because it will slow the air down, it'll compress it harder, and then when it releases from the back end, if you've got a well-designed duct tailpipe, you're going to get some serious thrust gains from that. And that's a lot more science and a lot more technology that's going into these fans these days. Now you have a look at that, okay? You know, everything I've told you about that, all those straightening vanes, all the amount of fans you get, the nice big cone attached to the fan, you've got the lead-in ring here. That fan was only $18 off the internet, and the 14 blade was 18. This was meant to be a 10 blade, but they sold me a 12 blade. This was only $12. Now I couple that with the $70 motor in this E-Flight Delta V motor fan, the BL15. That's $70. That's only $82 and $88 if I was to buy that. But I've got one better than that, because I haven't gone with the E-Flight motor for my 14 blade here. I've gone with a Dr. Mad Thrust 3000 kV motor, and that was only $30. So this 14 blade unit, when put together, is only going to have cost me $48. $48. So really, this should not be appearing in planes that we are buying today, but unfortunately it is. A lot of the 70mm planes that you find on the Hobby King website, they come with a fan very similar to this, and there's no need for it. I think Hobby King are probably hoping that you're going to throw this out and get a better one, and they're just giving you one to get along with. But Star Max and Ego and a few other companies that are producing 70mm fans, they're still putting this kind of fan into them, and you know, it shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be done. If you're looking to get performance, then you need to be looking at getting rid of something like this and heading to either the Delta V for maximum reliability with decent performance, or for something like this. You know, something like this, which gives you the added gimmick of the turbine sound as well. Now, okay, that's sort of an overview of EDFs. That's sort of giving you a little bit of information about how they work, a little bit of information about why some are better than others. Now I'm going to talk to you about thrust and torque, okay? Because this is the important information. If you're putting a plane together and you want to put you know, a decent fan into your plane, what you're going to be really concerned with is your thrust, your speed, and your torque. And that's the whole reason you're going to be changing these over. I mean, the sound is nice from these multi-bladed ones, but the main reason you're going to change it over is because you want to get decent performance. So decent performance, let's have a look at that scenario now. What we've got to talk about now is the kV rating of the motor and what we're going to get from battery versus motor kind of performance. Now 70mm ducted fans have primarily been 4-cell mated. They normally have a motor around 3000 kV and you apply a 4S battery and that will give you around about 48,000 RPM. And that's good. 48 to 50, that's good. That's your optimal thrust range. But you can start putting 70mm fans onto bigger batteries like 6S or 5S, and that's across the range as well, because 64mm fans, some people put them on 4S instead of 3S, and the 35mm fans and 50mm fans. I've got a 50mm fan in a little Katana, and you know, you can start to run those on 3 or 4S. It just depends on what you're looking for, and I'm going to go into that right now. You're going to have two kinds of performance with your plane. What you're going to have is straight line speed versus vertical performance. Now, vertical performance is very important. Or I think it is anyway. That's how well your aircraft is going to perform with its nose up, defying gravity at full power. And that's where you've got your power and your torque, where they differ. Now, if we look at the Delta V first, I'll just move these out of the way. If we look at the Delta V first, what we've got is a 5-bladed fan, very, very hard and very, very thick fans, a very wide can, and a 3200 kV motor. Now what this is going to do is this is going to propel a Habu that weighs about 1 kilogram at about 85 miles an hour. And that's not bad. 85 miles an hour for a scale plane, for a 15 scale plane, is pretty good. 85 miles an hour. If you pull the stick back and stick the plane vertical, this thing will go vertical at a pretty decent speed, but at about 200 meters it's going to start to bleed energy. There's not enough fans here, there's too much of a gap between each fan. 3200 kV motor can only produce a certain amount of torque on a 4S, and what's going to happen is at about 200 meters the aircraft is going to stall and it's going to start to come back down. But you know, 200 meters is quite high for a little foam model, and 85 miles an hour is pretty decent straight line speed. So that's what you're going to get from that. But if you were to put this onto a 2600 kV motor and run it on a 6L battery, you're still going to be at around the 50,000 RPM mark. But what's going to happen then is your torque is going to take over from your power. So for straight line speed, you're probably still going to maintain around 85 to 90 miles an hour. You will probably pick up a little bit more straight line speed. When you put it into a vertical climb, what's going to happen is it's going to bleed power quite quickly, which means your speed will drop. You put it into a climb and your speed is going to drastically drop. It's probably going to drop within the first couple of seconds down to half, to probably at 40 miles an hour. But because it's got a lot of torque, it will just keep on pushing the aircraft up. The aircraft will go past 200 meters, probably past 300 meters, and then it will start to bleed energy at about 350 and start to come back to ground. So if you were running this 3200 on a 4S in one machine, and you were running another one of these on a 2600 with a 6S, straight line speed, the 6S would probably be a bit quicker, but put them into a climb, the one on the 4S is going to climb up to 200 feet in very, very short amount of time and leave the other one behind. But at about 200 meters, the other one is going to pass it and go almost twice the height before it starts coming back down. Thrust versus torque. That's the key. That's what you have to work out when you want to fly your plane. What you're going to be looking for. If you're going to be looking for just straight line speed passes,
or if you want decent vertical performance for things like large loops and you know, just to impress the crowd of sticking the nose up in the air and going vertical almost out of sight. That's what you're looking for. If we come back to the multi-bladed fans, like these ones here, these ones, as I said before, are incredibly efficient. Now if you run this with about a 3000 kV, because it's got so many extra blades, and because it's nicely designed, it's nice and divergent at the back, it's got these long extra straightening vanes, as I've said there, it's got 8 straightening vanes. Because of the way that this one is designed, and because of the technology in it, with a 3000 kV on a 4S, this thing is going to have huge straight line performance. I mean, its straight line performance is probably, if you were looking at putting it in a Habu, it's probably going to be looking at about 120 miles an hour, because that's what mine gets on a 10 bladed fan with a BL15 3200 kV drive in it. It'll do 120 miles an hour. And if I stick it into a climb, it'll scream up to about 350 meters, and then it will start to bleed energy, and it'll probably make it to about 400, but then it will start to come back to ground. This is an incredible all-round performance. The only thing is, these do put a high draw on your battery. Probably lose about a minute of flight time in comparison to the E-Flight system, and that's why you'll probably need to have good throttle management if you're using these. But they really do produce, you know, very, very decent thrust and torque. But if you were to drop the kV of these, if you were to drop the kV to say 2600, or even go down to 2100 and run it on a 6S, straight line speed is actually going to drop off, because I've got a configuration set up like that. Straight line speed is probably going to drop down to about 95 to 100 miles an hour. The vertical climb rate, the actual speed at which it climbs, is probably going to drop off as well. You're probably going to drop down to about 60, 70 miles an hour, but it will push it right past 500 meters. The climbing, once you start torquing these up, the climb rate is you know, very impressive for how long it will just keep on pushing something like a Habu up until you just can't see it anymore. Now one of these, just to give you an idea, one of these paired with the motor from the E-Flight is producing about 1.8 kilograms of thrust. 12 bladed fan, 3200 kV, and it's only producing a maximum belt about 72 amps. So you could still, if you were looking at putting it in a Habu, you could still run a Habu on a 4S for about 4.5 to 5 minute flight. But the ESC, you wouldn't have to change. The ESC, the 60 amp standard E-Flight ESC, you wouldn't have to change it. It would handle this without a problem. No problem at all. If you just took the motor out of this, put it into this, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I actually performed an experiment once as well of taking this fan out of here and actually putting it into the Delta V can, and I actually got gains. Even though that's got less straightening vanes, I actually got even more. I probably got about 1.9 kilograms of thrust. As for the 14 blade, I don't know, because I haven't been that high before. 10 and 12 I have, 14 I haven't. But the 12 bladed fan with the 4S and 3000 kV motor, I was getting about 2.1 kilograms of thrust. 10 blade, 1.8, 12 blade, 2.1 kilograms. In a Habu that only weighs a kilogram, you've got more than 2 to 1 thrust, and you lose about a minute of flight time, and you don't have to change out the ESC. It's definitely a step way beyond what this is being sold. You know, this sort of thing here, it just shouldn't be on the market. Everyone should be at a starting point about here. If you buy a Freewing Rebel 70, a Rebel Sport Jet, or whatever you want to call it, or you go out and buy a Dynam Meteor, they've got a very similar system to this. It's not quite as good, but it's up there with it. It's probably about 950 to 1,000 grams of thrust, whereas this one's 1.2 kilograms. But this is your starting point. This is where you start, and that's just for 70 mil. There are versions of these all across the range, all the way from 35 mil, 50 mil, 64, 70, 80, 90, 125, whatever. They have all these configurations. So I hope that's helped in some way. I hope that's given you some kind of insight into EDFs when it comes to matching an EDF with a plane, with a motor and a battery, and a price range as well. There is nothing really to surpass getting something like this, a 14 or a 12 blade, matching it with a Dr. Madthrust 3000 kV or the E-Flight 3200 kV motor. Put them together into your model if you're looking for a 70 mil size, and you'll never look back. That will be all the EDF you ever need. And like I say, they do make equivalents of these in all the sizes. So, as I said, this is your starting point. These are where you should be aiming to. There are a lot of other gimmicks out there. They do actually make these fans in aluminium casings as well, which is still just as good. I don't think it makes any difference to the performance. It makes a bit difference to the strength. You can probably crush them a little bit more if you're really trying to fit them snug into a fuselage. Really, the biggest thing about EDFs that you have to really decide on is your flight time level, your batteries that you've got, the plane it's going into, and where you're looking at, whether you're wanting just straight line speed or how you want your vertical performance to be. But if you listen to what I've said and you take that information, I think that it'll genuinely help you, and you'll definitely be able to get the performance that you want. Anyway, I'm sorry if I've bored you. I'm sorry if this has been a long, drawn-out video. It is quite late at night. I just wanted to try and get this video out online because I think somebody needed to put one out there to help people getting into EDFs. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I hope this has helped, like I said, and take care and happy flying. Bye-bye.